I bought the R6 a year ago. Should you buy the R6? Yes. But should you buy the R5?
I would.
Hello everyone, today we are going to try and get through this video all without my R6 overheating. And if you think that's a joke, it's not. The last two videos I've shot, the R6 overheated at around the 18-minute mark, and that was only shooting on 4K at 24 frames. So fingers crossed. A year ago, I made the leap of faith and decided to up my photography game by purchasing the R6. But interestingly enough, I've made some transitions throughout the last year, one of them being that I do a lot more video now. I post almost daily on TikTok, YouTube has been pretty well weekly, and I even do some video projects on the side. Originally, what convinced me to get the R6 is the fact that it is essentially a 1DX in a smaller form factor and for a cheaper price. Before the R6, I was shooting on a Canon 70D, and while it worked great for me at the time, as soon as I tried the R6, I realized how much of an improvement had been made in camera technology since I originally purchased that camera back in around 2011. There have been a lot of people who have talked really high level about how great the R6 is after a year or 6 months or 8 months, but no one has really gotten into some of the more specific features, and in particular the video features. If you're still here wondering whether or not you should drop 3,000 Canadian dollars on the R6, chances are you've probably already made up your mind, so I'd say go ahead and get it. I understand we all want to find the perfect camera, and there's a good chance you may have even been eyeing the R6 for a while. For perspective, I purchased the R6 with the intent of using it just for photo, but as I discovered with all the video features on it, it is extremely well suited for doing all types of video work, whether that's for social media, for personal projects. Because it has the 4K 60 frames, there is a lot of flexibility and a lot of quality options at your disposal. So if you're someone who is a photographer and thinking about doing more video work, stick around because you may find this helpful in terms of what I've found and how I've applied that to the way I now shoot video. In this video, I'm going to focus primarily on video features that I found helpful and others that I found a little bit lacking. As a photo shooter, the R6 does a great job, and so there's really not too much to criticize. I'm going to do another video that explains the RF lenses I purchased in the order that I purchased them and why I made those decisions. And I'll probably do a third video that goes into the specifics of how I'm gonna take my R6 and make it a more reliable video shooter with some items that I have coming in the mail. So make sure you subscribe and stick around for that video because that's gonna be coming later. I'm gonna jump into this and I've got some notes, so I'm just gonna read off those to make sure I don't forget anything. As a photo shooter, some people take issue with the fact that the camera is only 20 megapixels. While that doesn't seem like a lot, there are two advantages to it. The first being that they're gonna be sharper, cleaner pixels. There's gonna be a lower noise threshold because of the pixel density of the sensor, and so whether you're shooting portraits, wildlife, landscape, cityscapes, or architecture, I've shot all those types of things and never had a problem with the megapixels being too low. The one thing that really stood out to me about the R6 compared to the R5 is they both have dual card slots, but the R6 has dual SD cards. Now, compact flash can be a little bit tricky. While they are faster speeds, they're also a bit more expensive, and at the time I wasn't ready to commit to spending more money on compact flash cards. Third point is that the autofocus is actually incredible. Even compared to the R, I've since shot with the R, both the R6 and the R on the same day, and I just found the R6 to be way superior in terms of how good it could latch on to not only faces, but that eye autofocus. One of the things I didn't necessarily appreciate before having a mirrorless camera was the electronic viewfinder. One, it helps in darker situations because the electronic viewfinder can actually brighten itself beyond what the exposure is, and so you can kind of frame your picture even if it wouldn't have been bright enough to do so with an optical viewfinder. Recently, Canon put out an update for the R6, which allows you now to use both memory card slots when recording video. So you can have that dual card feature, but one thing that is a little bit disappointing is that as soon as you finish recording, there's a little bit of a time buffer where the R6, I believe, needs to write to both cards. If you do single recording, that doesn't exist, so I don't know if that's something internally with the camera. I use pretty good memory cards, so I do not think it's my memory cards. I do think it's a limitation of the camera that wasn't necessarily a feature they originally designed for. And so living with that 2 to 3 second delay is reasonable, but there have been a few times where I've stopped a recording and wanted to then restart the recording only to miss a few seconds of what I was trying to capture. For me, the biggest feature that is a reason why I now wish I had gone with the R5 over the R6 is 4K 120 frames per second. Of course, I didn't buy my R6 with the intention of shooting video, but now realizing that the R5 has the ability to do 4K 120 frames a second is kind of a little bit of a letdown for me. The reason for that is that both cameras have the same internal processor, so in theory, the R6 should be able to do 4K 120 frames a second. I suspect the reason that it can't is probably because the sensor readout is not as fast, or maybe because it would require more bitrate than what can actually be written to SD cards. And of course the R5 has compact flash, which has a faster write speed. So a little bit of a trade-off. One thing I am considering is that there's the rumored R5C. So if I was to get an R5, I would probably wait for that because supposedly it solves some of the overheating issues. One thing that I haven't seen anyone talk about, but as soon as you start shooting with the R6 for video, you'll run into is the fact that there are C modes, or the custom modes on the dial. And unfortunately, you can't set any custom video modes using the C modes on the dial switch. That's super important for me because a lot of the time I want to switch between different frame rates. So for example, maybe I'm shooting just general footage at 24 frames per second. Then I want to do some slow-mo, so I'm going to switch to 60 frames a second, or then I even want to go down to 120 frames per second. The R6 has 3 custom modes, and that would be perfect to map those frame rates to the different custom modes. Unfortunately, you can't do that. Another limitation is that you can't shoot in log outside of any mode other than the dedicated video mode. So if you're in aperture priority and you hit the video record button, the only thing it can do is record in the standard Canon color profile. It seems a bit weird to me, and I don't know why they don't offer that feature. From my understanding is that the custom modes on the R5 can actually be mapped to different frame rates, and you can control all those settings. So I don't know if this is just a way for Canon to limit higher end features for the R5 and try to get those who really want to do video to switch from the R6 to the R5, but it seems like a silly limitation to me. The question that everyone is curious about is, does the R6 overheat? Interestingly enough, I've only ever had it overheat in 2 scenarios. One being where I was recording to both memory card slots and externally monitoring via the USB-C. So I was running the Canon software so that I could see it on my screen and recording myself to both cards internally at the same time. I think it was just too much for the camera to handle, and so it really quickly built up a lot of heat. And of course, that was shooting in summer indoors and the air conditioning wasn't working perfectly. So I think all those things adding up together were just an unfortunate set of circumstances that I guess can't be avoided. But practically, I've never had it overheat on me while out doing a shoot. That being said, I usually don't record for longer than 5 minutes at a time. It's little bits of video here and little bits of video there, and it's been perfectly fine. I never thought this would be a big deal, but I've since learned how important it is that the R6 has no crop when shooting in video mode. So some cameras, because the sensor is bigger than the resolution of the video, will actually crop in to only use a smaller portion of the sensor. Why that matters is because if you're shooting a wide angle and you're trying to get everything in, all of a sudden, if you're shooting cropped, your view is going to be a lot more narrower and you're not going to get the picture that you were expecting. For example, the R has a crop when shooting in certain video modes, and so if you're trying to match footage between 2 cameras, it's not going to look quite the same. One thing that's important when going to video is the speed of your memory cards. With photos, it doesn't matter so much because cameras have really good built-in buffers, which means as you're taking photos, it can store it onto the buffer before dumping it to the memory card. For video, that option doesn't exist. It needs a fast memory card so that when you're recording 4K 60 frames a second, it can write that directly to your memory cards. In my case, I'm using some more expensive Sony cards. I did try some Lexar cards that were cheaper, that were supposed to provide 4K 60 frames writing speed, but I found that they weren't fast enough, and I would get an error on my screen that says writing to card, and then it would freeze up and lock you out of doing anything. If you're shooting photo and now moving to video, one thing that's important to understand is video codecs. The Canon R5 and R6 shoot in an H.265 10-bit codec that is a little bit hard to edit. And this is something not a lot of people talk about. Now, if you're going from photo to video, you're like, what the heck is a codec? I have no idea what that means. So say, for example, you've shot a whole bunch of 4K 60 frames per second footage. If you drop that into pretty much most PCs, unless you've got it really upgraded, you'll find that in Premiere Pro, it will just lag along the timeline. There are a few ways around this. One is to get a Mac that has an M1 chip. You can also get an NVIDIA RTX card, which is supposed to be able to handle the decoding of those codecs, or you can use proxies. In my case, I use Cineform proxies at 720p and find that actually helps the editing workflow and makes it a lot smoother. If you're someone who does daily vlogs or needs to edit footage really fast, you may find that the R6 ecosystem just slows you down. It doesn't make sense to make proxies, especially if you're trying to turn out videos really fast. So if you're someone who is looking to do that, I would say stay away from Canon from now, unless you're willing to upgrade to an M1 Mac or spend thousands of dollars on really high-end GPUs. Finally, my absolute favorite thing about the R6 is that it has 10-bit internal recording. That may not mean a lot, but what it does mean is that you have a little bit more forgiveness when editing your footage afterward. Especially if you're shooting in log, it means that if you underexpose a little bit or overexpose a little bit, there is more forgiveness when bringing that footage back in, doing color correction, and then color grading. There's been a few shots where it's just been way blown out and I've needed to bring the footage back, and I've been quite surprised with how forgiving that 10-bit codec is. Other camera companies do offer 10-bit, but it is not on every camera yet. You can also do external recorders, but the nice thing about the R5 and the R6 is that it's all built into a really nice package and you don't have to add anything extra. So, do I wish I had an R5? Am I happy with my R6? Yes. And it overheated just as I was finishing. But what I'll say is, do I wish I had an R5 or am I happy with the R6? Well, yes and no. I like that the R6 has only SD cards. I like that it has a physical dial over the digital dial of the R5, but I do like the fact that the R5 has 120 frames 4K. To me, that seems super awesome. Should you go with the R over the R6? I would say if you're someone who just does photos, there's definitely advantage in savings and in the fact that you have more megapixels with the R, but the R6 does come with amazing autofocus. Because I've transitioned to doing a lot more video work over the last year, my future plans would either be to get an R5 in addition to my R6, or potentially get an R5C when that comes out. I think the other option would be something like a C70, but that's a bit more expensive and not the level of video production that I need to do. Whatever the R5C offers with its active cooling or maybe extended recording times would probably fill the void that I need in terms of getting that 4K 120 frames footage. But for now, all the projects I'm doing are more than suitable to be done on the R6. So I'm super happy with it. Anyways, thanks for watching this to the end. If you thought this video was helpful, go ahead and tell YouTube that you think it was worth watching by hitting the like button down below. And if you want to see more content like this, make sure you hit subscribe so that you can stick around, and I'll see you in the next one.